Hi there. Welcome. This is a webinar on the new currency of attention. I'm Dawn Tucker, run brand strategy here at Amsive, and we're going to get started in a second. When we're done with this, we will be sending over the deck as well as a video so that you can replay it and kind of see the content that's within this. So no need to like rush and jot down or do screenshots. We'll be sending this all to you after. We also encourage you to really put in any questions you might have within the chat. We are going to reserve the last 10 minutes for questions, and we'll get to as many of them as we can and really welcome a little bit of that interaction with you. So joining me today, I have two colleagues. One is Eva Gott, who is a partner and head of research at thinqinsights. Eva and I have been partnering together on research studies for over a decade at this point. Anything from wine, water, healthcare, probably everything in between. So I have a really long history of working together and really value Eva's insights. And also with me is my colleague here at Amsive, Alyssa Windle, who runs all of media planning and strategy. So welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining me today. We're
Thank you
gonna
for
hop
having us,
right,
Dawn.
hop right into it. Um, today we're living in a choice overload economy. We all know, right? There's too many ads, there's too many things going on. You don't know where to look or what to focus on. So you have to really think harder nowadays about how to garner that attention. So we're going to be going through a bunch of questions today that kind of get at that from different angles and kind of how to be thinking about this, whether it's the number of impressions and what constitutes quality, to how to really get that attention and how to be thinking about your brand, what research you should be doing, and also things to be thinking about today, right? So we've started the fourth quarter. We got another couple months still left of the year. Is there anything that you can be doing today to really prepare yourself, prepare your brands for 2026? So with that, our first topic is about attention. So, nowadays, as we know, right, the rules have changed. So attention is no longer earned. It's engineered. So to kind of start this conversation, Alyssa, if you can speak a little bit about that shift from earned to engineered from a media perspective and what that means today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, from a media perspective, we have to now think about how we're planning for both the algorithm and for people. So, it's not just about reach, it's not just about getting in front of the people as we traditionally had planned in the past, but it's about showing up with the right message in the right context to really resonate and drive that engagement, because ultimately that is what will feed the algorithm. So, algorithms are favoring things like timing, recency, engagement as well to keep that content visible. And so we have to keep that in mind and make sure that we are staying consistent and feeding those algorithms. And then the messaging has to be memorable, right? The creative is really what matters to the people. So ultimately, it's the combination of the algorithms and the people, and having that combination is critical to garnering that attention overall.
Thank you. And then when we think a little bit about how creative feeds the algorithm, the first one, and this is something we've been talking about to our clients for years, it feels like now, but when you're looking at different channels, different platforms, really think about making your creative so that it feels native and not generic. It's not about just resizing to fit between TikTok and YouTube and all the different channels. We really need to think about how do we blend into that experience and stand out without sticking out. The second thing really is looking to optimize for early engagement. You only have 3 seconds to make that impression. I think like a few years ago, I feel like that was double. It was 6 seconds. Now it's 3 seconds. So when you think about that, right, long gone are those days where, creating a more cinematic TV spot that will run where maybe, towards the end of it, you finally reveal who the brand was. You really need to get some of that information in those 3 seconds to really start engaging people. Um, And then three, how do we drive repeatable interactions? So we know that algorithms surface content that generates conversation or ongoing engagement. So how do we use those calls to action that encourage not just seeing the ad, but some type of interaction, whether that's sharing, remixing, or community participation? Just as one stat, TikTok says that ads with a hashtag challenge generate up to 17% higher brand recall than standard ads. So really thinking about what are those things in those different channels that will make people act on it, even if it's not a sale. What are the other ways that we can have them act and interact? We also want to balance short-term and long-term signals. So performance ads do optimize for conversions, but brand ads, they optimize for memory. And Eva's going to be talking about that in a little bit too, right? Like how that plays off the memory and recall and brand linkage. Um, we also know we want to feed variety, not just repetition. So all of these platforms are going to penalize you if there's ad fatigue. So one thing that we're really careful about tracking is when do we hit that level of ad fatigue, and making sure that we're optimizing not just our channels and how we're buying, but also what the creative looks like. And then finally, for number six, we want to build brands, distinctive brand assets that outlast the feed. So again, when it comes down to just core brand strategy, what does your brand stand for? And I think that what this all equals is, you can confuse one and six. So you need to both have ads that feel native and not generic to the channel that they're in, but they should still feel like your brands. So really important to make sure that wherever you show up, you're laddering up to that brand umbrella and that same creative strategy. And transitioning over to Eva, just to talk a little bit about when we think about this fight to get attention, how does that also play out in the research space? Because there's a fight there too.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I mean, think about all of the requests you get to provide feedback, whether it's from your car dealership, your doctor's offices. Um, every time you buy something on Amazon, you're getting like overwhelmed with requests to provide your feedback. It used to be that when we would do surveys, I'm just competing with other surveys, but now my survey, there's huge cross-category competition. I'm competing with Amazon. I'm competing with your doctor's office to get feedback from you. Not only is it just this overwhelming competitive landscape, but as we were talking earlier, the way that people are dealing with things on TikTok, the fact that you now have 3-second ads. I used to think like 15 seconds was too short. Um, Consumers now have built that into how they want to provide feedback for you as well. So an average consumer survey could be about 5 minutes. An average B2B could be about 10 minutes. Like, think about that real estate. That's 25 questions, maybe, if you're lucky. So you really have to be smart with what you put in those 25 questions. Really focus on a specific objective. Think about how you would answer that question. Like, how would, really build thoughtfully that survey so that you're getting back really valuable insights. I mean, the good news is that we do have new models out there that are blending different tools and channels. For instance, I use a platform called Meaningful that allows me to pull in secondary research, primary research, social listening, even your own, like the internal CRM data, right? And build out like a great dashboard. So not only does that help us deal with siloed data that a lot of brands are dealing with, but it also helps you be more efficient. So you're going out to consumers, kind of where they want to give you honest feedback, and then you're using your primary research then to kind of help fill in the gaps for the things you don't know.
And I think that's really hard and a really important thing. A 5 to 7 minute survey for consumers is probably less than 20 questions if they're not complicated questions. So I find that's always hardest when I'm working with clients on kind of structuring what a research study is to determine, like, we can add something, but you got to take something away, and to really think about, if you have the answer to that question, how will it be actionable? To make sure
Yeah.
that it is a data point that, you will actually use. And it's hard to get it down.
And Dawn, it's even harder too because budgets are shorter and you're like, you want to do as much as you can if you're going out to do research. So it really is, it's a huge trade-off. Huge
Yeah.
trade-off.
Okay. Next, impressions are worthless without intention. So when we think about impressions, it's right, it's not just about setting goals to get the most impressions out there, but there is a huge quality component, which I think is becoming more and more important. And that really begins with what you're serving, the correct creative. What is the creative? So if we look at this stat, if everyone walks away not remembering anything else from this webinar, I hope you'll remember this. Nielsen found that 47% of sales lift from advertising can be attributed to the creative. That means that, Alyssa's team could be doing absolutely everything right. They have the best plan. They've even like identified the best audience. And if the creative is not hitting, you're not going to see those results. So we really need to start at the beginning, if you will. And what is that creative that's really going to connect so that we start to see those results? You know, again, just not to be on my brand advertising uh, uh, soapbox, but we really do see with a lot of campaigns also that, you really do need to build that brand. If we move straight to performance, lower funnel, and your brand doesn't have the awareness that you need, we don't see the same results. So we need to really start at the top, build that strong, not just that it's an awareness, but there's a familiarity that puts you within that consideration set, and also makes you more memorable. So, our process is, it's pretty simple on paper. We weed out what is it about your brand that's the best value propositions, and where does that meet what the audience is looking for, and really looking for that emotional connection and having a solid creative point of view that does make it distinctive. It's like super important, again, to make all of those impressions that you were putting out there count.
You know, Dawn, I also wanted to add too that not only does the brand help differentiate, but oftentimes too, it gives people the reason why you're more valuable. So it can actually, why would I choose a brand over a generic? It gives you that value proposition of why that brand is worth more as
And
well.
thank you for saying that, right? So like, if I'm looking at advertising and I can cover up the logo and put any other logo on it, you're probably not there yet, right? What is that distinctive thing that sets it apart? Which is really hard to do, especially there are certain categories where it feels like, they're very similar things, and you need to do the work to kind of set up, what does our brand stand for? What are the brand pillars? Not just from a brand perspective, but operationally, how are we actually executing upon that in a way that is believable? Because we don't want to just say it, we want to be doing it. And then, getting to, all right, now let's say you got the great creative, you got the creative ready to go. How do you ensure that you have those quality impressions, Alyssa?
Yeah, so like you said, we're learning that it's not just about the quantity, it's about the quality. And really, the quality of the exposure is just as, if not more important than the quantity of exposures. So, from a planning perspective, we really have to balance the volume with the value. We want to prioritize impressions that do earn that attention and ultimately have a greater impact. We know that high attention placements like CTV or a high impact display, the more dynamic creative, ones that have strong CTAs, anything that makes that creative stronger in a placement that has that dynamic nature is going to drive higher conversion lift, 130% higher. It's going to have lower cost per acquisition, nearly cuts it in half. And then it also has stronger brand recall, which ultimately is going to drive so much of that. So really important to have high attention placements. Like Dawn said, like we're saying, it's not just that all impressions are equal. Attention really is about that exposure driving impact, and making sure that it is garnering that attention.
And then, so how do we know, right? How do we know if this attention that we're garnering, if the creative is distinctive, if the impressions were quality enough to stand out? How do we measure that?
Yeah, from a media perspective, right, we want to look at things like dwell time. We want to look at engagement. We want to understand what that brand lift is. Having those studies in place, looking at those engagement metrics are going to be important, right, just for that measurement and that understanding at a very impactful level.
And from a getting inside the heads of our consumers perspective.
This is unfortunately not the best news because what we're really thinking here is, we've got, I don't want to mention too much brain fog, but there's a little brain fog, kind of that post-COVID thinking. We're definitely having those attention shifts that's happening because of our media channels. There's some societal shifts happening as well. Bringing all this together where that all coalesces, there's some unfortunate kind of negative impacts on what's going on with our brains right now. I'm referencing some research from Klein and Partners that does some healthcare studies that kind of talks about where our brains are in this day and age. And we've talked a lot about attention span, so I'm not going to talk too much there. But memory and patience are decreasing. About a third of the consumers are saying, you know what, I'm having trouble remembering simple things, things in my day-to-day life. And I'm also losing my patience more. So I'm not remembering, I don't have a lot of attention, and my patience is low. Like that's a bad mix. And then now let's think about what this does for your advertising, the brand linkage in the lower right corner. 4 in 10 say, if I may even remember your ad, but I don't remember who it was for. That's scary. You've spent a lot of time and effort to put together this great campaign, and people are struggling to remember it. That's concerning. That's concerning. And if Dawn, you go to the next slide, I can talk a little bit about kind of now what's that impact on some of your scores. So, if you don't make simple, memorable brand is the star advertising, and we said that's really hard if you've only got 3 seconds of real estate for your ad. What is that actually doing now to your brand linkage? It's really hard to get it, right? Let's pretend in this example, about 2/3 recall your ad. That's great, right? I remember your ad. Now you say, well, who was it for? And if only 20% recall that that's the actual brand, the sponsor, the linkage back is 29%. So again, if we don't find ways to really not just make it simple and memorable, but really make it relevant, it goes out of their brain. We have very little space left up there to recall anything, and the brand name will go first unless you connect it and make it relevant to them.
And I think that there's a trend, and one, there are two things I think that are at play, in addition to maybe our brains deteriorating on its own. But we have this one, as we talked about, there's so much out there that's dividing our attention. But I'm also seeing that there's a lot of brands that say like, oh, I want to be on TikTok, and go for things like shock value to grab attention. And it really has no connection whatsoever to your brand. And people are saying, how do I get attention, but missing that second part? So it's great to get attention, but these numbers, right, could not be any more damning. Like you got to get the attention, and you also have to make that connection. And it's got to tie back to your brand, and it has to be different from what your nearest competitors are saying. So next, we're going to touch on a little bit of personalization. So personalization is dead. Relevance is what matters. I think that we went through a period where it was like, how much can we personalize? Let's personalize as much as we possibly can. And especially, here at Amsive, we have a lot of data, and we do a lot of work in building these audience profiles and really understand and know everything about the people that we're looking to target. But you really need to walk that fine line between what we're kind of saying is like creepy and relevant. So just to get a little bit, like as an example, right? It could feel invasive if I get a message that says, hey, Dawn, we saw you looked at red shoes 3 times last night. Like, okay, someone's watching me. It's over targeting, right? And also not really necessary. So taking some sensitive information, I don't like to know when people were watching me and they know what I was doing at what time. It just is going a little bit too far. Ads that follow you everywhere, right? Like it's going to take the focus away from your brand, and more people are going to be thinking about how it's working and how they know, because it feels like surveillance. It's not service. It's not helpful at that point. So some of the things we kind of try to look at is, when we're developing personas and really developing those personas based on what different categories of relevance are, so that we make sure that we're hitting what the key points are in terms of what's going to motivate them, without getting, as we said, like too personal. Okay, so it should feel helpful. So maybe instead of saying that they know I shopped for red shoes 3 times last night, we say still shopping for running shoes. Here's our most popular style for fall. Get them back into the loop, get them to look at something again. Doesn't even have to be the exact same thing, but just that nudge, that little reminder that they didn't complete what they started. Using those contextual and behavioral cues, not using personal data. We don't want to go out there and say, because you have a credit score of 648, this is what we're giving you today. We want to let them know we're giving them a pre-approved offer. We don't have to be that specific about it. We just need to be specific enough to be relevant to them so that they do take that next step and feel like this is for them without being too much for them. So again, we're really looking to match that need and moment, not the identity. And then in terms of media planning perspective, Alyssa, what is this formula?
Yeah. Yeah. From our perspective, it's really about making sure that we are doing the research, we are getting the insights, and we're able to turn that into targeting that does feel helpful and not creepy, like you were saying. So the more we understand our consumer, the more we understand their behaviors and their interests and their passions, and can tailor the placements, the channels, the creative to them, it feels like we are connecting with them rather than just watching them. So allows us to really understand our consumer and then connect with them in those right moments. And so ultimately, when the message and the mindset and the timing are all aligned because of that research, because of what we know, and because of what we can put into place as a result, that's when personalization feels more meaningful rather than feeling invasive and overdone.
Great. Next, we want to talk a little bit about loyalty, and specifically loyalty as a bit of a illusion. In the book How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp, which is really very research based. If anyone on the call has not read How Brands Grow, I really do encourage you to pick it up, because what they did is they took years and years of research and data, to kind of substantiate some things that we should be kind of like Mythbusters. And one of them is that there's anything you can do about loyalty. And the truth is that people aren't loyal. Like we said, they're busy, and also their attention is very scattered. They buy what's easy to remember. So really it's that idea that you have to have that mental availability, which for one means always being out there. And you, your buyers are just as likely to be light shoppers of the other brands that you're competing with today. So Alyssa, what does that mean from your perspective, and how do you kind of play into that, we can't just assume that buyers are going to come back again?
Yeah, I think we're learning more and more that loyalty doesn't last forever, and we need to be consistent and relevant to keep earning that attention. It used to be that you had a loyal consumer and you could kind of rest in your laurels on that, but not anymore, right? You need to stay consistent, stay in market. And so we have a few key pillars here that we like to plan around and think about as we're thinking about not only getting in front of new, but making sure that we're keeping our loyal customers as well. So always be in market, prioritizing cross cross-channel consistency, both of these are key, right? That visibility is going to build trust and the consistency is going to reinforce it. No one's going to purchase a brand that they haven't seen. And even your loyal customers, they are being inundated with other information and new brands, and they may be willing to switch if they're not seeing you consistently. So really reinforcing that messaging, making sure you have that visibility is critical. It's also important to balance retention and reacquisition efforts, as well as invest in your brand equity, right? So those upper funnel efforts, they are going to fuel longevity and ultimately performance. You can't be focused on one versus the other. If you're focused too much on performance, you will lose out on that longevity and keeping your loyal customers. That upper funnel and those awareness efforts are going to be what keep them in the fold and keep them aware and keeping you consistently amongst the competitor set.
So Alyssa, that basically means that in a sense, like you have to treat your customers the same way that you would be treating prospects.
Yeah, exactly. It's a much more balanced approach. You're looking at them very similarly, and that awareness is critical with your loyal consumers just as much as your new consumers as well.
Right. I mean, if that wasn't the case, right, McDonald's would never need to advertise, but they advertise to stay top of mind, and it does make a difference. Of course, everyone knows who McDonald's is. They have that brand awareness, but if it's not top of mind and we're not constantly kind of staying on, there's going to be other brands that are going to get into their brain and they're going to make different choices.
Exactly. Another point we've touched on, relevance is more important than frequency. So it's not just about showing up or showing up more often. It's really about saying the right things that connect and have that impact and drive those actions we're looking for. So really important to balance both, but make sure that critical piece of that relevant and resonating creative is there. And last but not least, obviously, testing, learning, optimizing continuously. Agility is critical. We know that, and it'll lead to that long-term success. But if you're not able to continually test and obviously optimize, you're going to fall behind, right? There's so many new opportunities out there to get in front of your audiences, and it's really important that you're willing to be agile and make those opportunities impactful for you as well.
And then getting a little bit more into, how you message and what the creative, again, relevance beats frequency. So we've already spoken about that. How can you be relevant to audiences? The right message at the right time. It matters more than the pure frequency of messaging. Invest in brand equity, not just performance. So again, as we, kind of just talked about as well, you gotta keep your brand top of mind, which does mean that full funnel mix and not just always just chasing, performance at the bottom level. And also prioritizing that cross-channel consistency. So how do we really tell that journey across every touch point, and reinforcing trust along the way? And that is a lot of what we spend a lot of our time here at Amsive talking about, and really audience science and how we do follow those customers, again, from offline to online, to really build, that um, the storytelling element of it, and really take them through a very controlled journey, understanding exactly who that audience is and understanding what the relevance is for them that drives that performance. And so speaking of that, we know, right, loyalty is anything but guaranteed. But to do that well, we have to really understand why are consumers shifting, what's driving their choices, and how are those choices evolving. So to unpack that a little bit, I'm going to hand it back over to Eva, who's going to take us into kind of the research space and what it reveals about today's consumers.
Yeah, there a really great example of some switcher mentality recently actually occurred in the healthcare industry. And when we think about things a few years ago, people would have their primary doctor, they'd have their primary system that they engaged with, and they were very happy kind of doing a one-stop shop, right? I go and do everything with that one healthcare system. COVID changed some behaviors. We had to, right? We had to engage with telehealth. We had to go to CVS to get our vaccines. We had to explore new urgent care. for some primary care, new places to go get lab work. And what happened is we kind of like it now, right? Like I like having those choices, and those new choices have opened up that healthcare experience where I don't have to stay with the same thing for the same system or the same doctor through all of those experiences. I can kind of choose my own adventure, right? So, thinking through now some of the metrics where, if I'm used to now having access and convenience, I may switch my healthcare provider. And 4 in 10 consumers have done that recently. Digital tools, scheduling options. I'm not sure how many of you have been recently on your My Chart or your, your EMR, but like scheduling an online appointment is a huge pain point. If you, as a system, learn how to actually navigate that, you can stop a lot of switching behavior. I mean, 1 in 3 would switch for better digital experiences. And like I just said, I want to mix. I want to pick what I want to do. And nearly 70% of consumers say, I don't see healthcare as a single kind of system-based experience anymore. I'm choosing my own adventure. So all of that to say, how can we maybe use research as a way to kind of understand some of those triggers, or maybe make ourselves smarter about how we can kind of work towards building a stronger brand to deal with the kind of the splintering loyalty that's happening. So one thing we can do, assess loyalty continuously. I'm not saying that you have to have always on surveys, but you can do pulse surveys through the year, kind of really understand awareness, familiarity, be on top of things, right? Understand where your consumers are. Do some secondary research, do some social listening, social scraping, understand the category disruptors, emerging competitors, maybe some shifts in kind of how your consumers want to engage with you. Map your modern decision journey. I actually was talking to a colleague of mine who works in the financial sector, and he mentioned to me that their departments are so siloed that they really don't know how people move from familiarity to consideration. This is a financial, like, there's a big gap there. You really need to maybe do a little new customer journey. Things are changing. People want to use digital tools. You have to kind of look at that, but you should never have that question of how do my own customers move from familiarity to consideration. That's a huge gap. Um, Listening for emotional shifts, not just behavioral ones. This is really important because we sit on a lot of behavioral data, we sit on a lot of demographic data, but that learning a little bit of what's happening in people's brains, you can see where they may be ready to shift, right? What are those triggers that's ready to happen that tells you this person is ready to shift from Geico to Progressive, for instance? Like there are some triggers that are happening, and if you stay on top of that, usually a little bit of qualitative helps with that. That's a really great way to go about it. A lot of people are sitting on segmentation. Again, building a little bit of attitudinal data makes your segmentation more powerful. So not just demographically or behaviorally, how do people fall out, but what attitudes, what motivations are also going on can help you bring really more power to your how you segment out your customers.
And that's a really good point because, again, we have a lot of data. There's a lot of data that's out there, but that data doesn't really tell you the why behind for your brand specifically, or why are they moving that way, or even begin to like predict what's coming. And I think you just used 2 really good examples, healthcare and the financial industry, right? Like COVID kind of forced people to leapfrog ahead to things that they didn't think they were ready or comfortable with, and found out that they really loved it. You needed to be on top of that. I know we did a lot of research for a lot of companies during COVID, where we were trying to assess, like, are people going to go back to, how they did things before, and just try to predict what's going to happen next? But you really can't do that without going out and actually talking to your consumers.
Yeah, yeah, and on top of that, Dawn, sometimes you get those little nuggets, specifically out of qualitative, that actually is what inspires your creative team or your media team to do something special, right? To bring that message back in to the creative or the channel. Like that's the other kind of missing piece of the puzzle. Like we can get information, it can make some operational changes, and we can also make some creative changes using some of those same information.
Yeah, I always, if your goal is to become a customer-centric company, you cannot do that without talking to people. You have to get out there and talk to people. The data alone is not going to tell you what you need to know, what they're looking for. If you truly want to stand for, make them your priority, you need to understand what their priorities are and to understand, as you said in this slide, right, that those priorities shift over time. So you need to be prepared and ready to know what's going to be next. So now we're going to talk a little bit about B2B. We very much break out, right? We have B2B clients, we have B2C clients. There are obviously distinctions between both of them. But what we know is that everything we've talked about today also applies to B2B buyers too. I mean, at its core, there's still people like you and I are. We're consumers in one part of our lives, and we're the B2B people on the other side. So they're still distracted and overwhelmed and pulled in a dozen directions. And I think that that's, becoming, even within the last year, a little bit worse. So if you can speak a little bit to what's going on today, Alyssa.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we see is that choice overload is just as real and just as prevalent in B2B. Like Dawn mentioned, people are busy. They're still people. They're busy. They're distracted. They're bombarded with messages just like everyone else. And so there's a lot of similarities from consumers to B2B decision makers. And so really becomes just as critical to show up in the right places, the places that really matter, where we see that they are learning, where they're connecting with brands, where they're evaluating brands. And right now, that's on social. So platforms like LinkedIn, YouTube, even TikTok have become the new professional landscape and ecosystem where we are seeing that discovery and that education and the influencing is happening. And so, really important to make sure we have a presence there. Obviously, we see here that the spend reflects that. B2B social investment is continuously growing with no end in sight. And right now, it's making up nearly half of all of digital spend in the space. And so that is significant. And as planners, we need to start thinking about, right, our job is to make sure that we're getting that attention and that we're getting media in the right places, and we're able to really impact decisions. So we're focused on social first strategies. We want to make sure that we're showing up in credible and engaging ways to earn that attention in crowded feeds, and able to make that impact that we're looking for in this space as the same as any other.
And to that point, that goes the same for research. And I have found B2B research has always been more difficult than consumer research in many ways. But there's even more rethinking that needs to be done today.
Yeah. I mean, just as you were talking about all the blur between kind of the social channels and using social channels for B2B communications, think about how we used to do research where you had B2B sample panels and there was very easy. You reached out to people, you talked to them. Now we're we're reaching out to them in those same channels in LinkedIn. Imagine how many emails you get a day, how many people reach out to you on LinkedIn. So a lot of it's spam. I'm now trying to push my invitation to those B2B participants in those same channels. It's very hard to kind of stand out. You do have to get creative, to be able to kind of break through the clutter. You have to connect with new partners. You have to come up with some hybrid approaches to be able to get to those B2B participants. Additionally, unfortunately, fraud is real. So I have to, it would be wrong of me not to mention in B2B that there is fraud, right? C-level people are not taking surveys for coffee points. There are some very educated people out there who are reverse engineering your survey to get a very attractive incentive that is part of B2B research. we get smart. We have some tech safety nets so that we can find them, but they really do end up looking a lot like real respondents. They don't speed, they don't straight line, they give you robust open-end answers. So you do have to actually spend a lot of time to make sure that they're real people. There's good news though. You can still get to high quality niche audiences. You just have to be smarter, right? Smaller sample sizes, shorter surveys. There's a lot of really great partners out there who know how to get to doctors, who know how to get to IT decision makers, who are using some of those same channels that we just talked about to find lookalike respondents and kind of reach out to people and bring them into your research. So you can still do great B2B research. You just have to be smarter about it and partner wisely, right? Like I said, there's some really great people who know how to vet respondents so that you're getting really good actionable B2B insights.
Yeah. So we just want to end on now is the time, as we mentioned in the beginning, to really be thinking about 2026. It's the perfect time to start getting ready. So what are some of the things that you could be doing? So just to start, number one, reassessing your audience model or building an audience model, really understanding who that audience is, who that customer is. One, that's going to be one of the key components to developing a strategy that will allow you to create that differentiated creative that can stand apart. Also allows you to understand where the relevance is, what are the factors are that you should be really honing in on for different personas, but really building that, who is your customer today? Is that who you want it to be tomorrow? If it's not, what are we going to do to help get you there? So that's like at its most core, something that we hope all of you, if you do not have a good understanding or good grasp on who your customer is today, now is a really great time to be doing that work.
Also a great time to be investing in some emotional understanding. I think, we've talked a lot about kind of going beyond demos and functional drivers. I mean, the really getting at those nuggets of emotional insights is so important. I always think of that one example about Pampers, right? I know this is an old one, but it's a good one, where they did research because they kept on thinking, oh, moms want more absorbent diapers, right? And so they kept focusing there. And then they did research and found out mom don't want more absorbent diapers. They want their kids out of diapers, right? That's a huge emotional insight that drives product development, that drives everything. And now we have pull-ups, right? So like thinking about that, like how can you get to those types of nuggets that really leads your brand to success?
And, as a brand strategist, there's nothing I love more than when I see a new spot, and I can see what the strategy is. And one of my favorite ones to bring out is Poppy. And 2 years ago, when they launched in the Super Bowl, their big ad, it was very clear. Their insight was that people really love to drink soda, but they feel really guilty when they do it. Very simple insight, right? And very simply laid out in what I thought was a very effective enough spot where they were ended up being bought out for almost $2 billion. So I think it worked. But again, they did that consumer work up front to understand what was that emotional connection.
Yeah, and you remembered the brand.
Oh,
2 years later, yeah. Something else we want to focus on is studying attention, not just getting that awareness, right? So we do want to make sure that we are getting that attention, knowing that it is the most valuable piece. So we want to measure dwell time. We want to measure engagement metrics. We want to measure brand lift, really helping us understand what is earning and sustaining that attention so that we can continue to guide the decisions we make based on that understanding and those data points. Another piece here, connecting brand and performance data. connected and related. But really, we know that a consistent, connected, full funnel media presence will drive the best results, both with your current and your future consumers. And so it's really important to have that media in market, but also to understand how it is working and how those efforts are connected, and being able to connect with your audience from the first introduction to the conversion. Very, very valuable, and something that we put at the forefront here with our audience first approach.
And something I'll add to that too is that, a lot of times what we see is you might have a pretty strong upper funnel and strong lower funnel, but we're missing that connective tissue in the middle that, and Eva, you were talking before about like, how do you get them in that consideration set? So really thinking about that full journey and not just being like total brand and like get $500 off, like, what is that story in between that helps you kind of pull it through a little bit, and thinking about, do you have all those components today? And if you don't, right, what work can you do in the next 2 months to kind of build some of that stuff out?
Exactly. And then 5 here, test, learn, and optimize. We touched on this, right? Really staying agile, testing often, optimizing always, being able to pivot quickly and being willing to learn and then scrap something that didn't work. Really valuable, and will allow your brand to stay relevant and ahead. So very, very important to be doing all of those things as well.
And Alyssa, too, there's so many new platforms now that it is easy to test your concepts either in real time or in a mocked real time. There's just a lot of options right now in terms of platforms to help you do that too.
Right. Important to take advantage because they're there. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Speaking of, you know, building your future-facing research plan. So I have kind of like a two-prong approach, particularly at this time of year. And one of it just kind of builds off what we were just talking about, Alyssa, which is learn about what's out there. There are a lot of great platforms there right now. There's a lot of AI-driven platforms. There are synthetic respondents. There's a lot of new things and not a lot of new ways to do research. Um, Sit on some demos, learn them, see what works for you. Reach out to people like myself or Dawn. Say, hey, what can I be doing? What can I be using? There's you don't want to overwhelm yourself, but just kind of get up to speed and get educated about all the different ways and platforms that you can use. And then the second part of that pronged approach is do a little housekeeping. What objectives do you have for your brand in the coming year? What are some gaps in your research knowledge? Think about it now, plan it out, and like we said before, because attention is so short, do it in little chunks, right? Do smaller surveys in a chunked approach. And if you plan a little bit now and have some of your objectives set up, you can hit with 2026 hit the ground running with your research plans.
That's great. So, and as Eva said, so here's a QR code here. If you snap that, you can arrange to contact any of us. We would love to speak to all of you individually further, have a chat about things that we spoke about today, how it relates to your brand. So I just wanted to mention that as we keep this up, but I think we're going to go take a few questions.
The first question is, what are some of the best ways for healthcare brands to use marketing to keep patients engaged when there is so much competition out there?
Okay, so specifically in the healthcare space, Alyssa, what are some of the tactics that you use for your healthcare clients to make sure that they're engaged in with a solid media plan?
Yeah, I think from a media perspective, we want to make sure that we are connecting with them throughout their journey. We know that it is a journey. We know that education is really important. We know that getting the information in front of them and connecting them with something that feels consistent and credible and meeting them throughout their journey is just a critical element of in the healthcare space for sure.
And again, I think, where really understanding what differentiates your brand in a way that's going to motivate those consumers, both for in a way for standing out. You know, for a lot of people in the healthcare space, right? There are certain things that a lot of people are talking, a lot of companies are talking about that are very consistent. So there are two things that I always ask. One, how do you substantiate that? Are you really doing it operationally? Because the people that are looking at your ads, they know the difference. They know if it just feels generic. So when we go back to that, if I put my hand over your logo, could I swap in another brand's logo in there? If the answer is yes, then you could probably do a little bit more work to tighten up what your brand and creative strategy is to kind of capture and keep that attention in a way that differentiates you from your other competitors in the market. We spend a lot of time of kind of looking at what is the white space in specific markets, where can we stand out, how can we stand out? Those are all things that are, I think, especially important within that healthcare area, and not to just assume that the patients or the customers, but to really talk to them and understand what truly are their pain points. If you speak to their pain points, they're going to remember, and they're going to there's going to be greater recall and action.
And Dawn, I also wanted to add too, as we talked earlier, there are things shifting, so think about some of the millennial and Gen Z and how they want to access healthcare, how they are using digital tools, AI for some of their healthcare needs. How is that going to impact things in a few years, right? So doing some competitive landscaping, maybe, we always talk about moms being the kind of the healthcare gatekeeper of their households. How is that going to shift? How, are you prepared for the things that are coming up? So a little bit of competitive landscaping and maybe even some social scraping and understanding what people are saying about your brand when they don't think you're listening. Those things right now would be really, really important as well.
And that's a really good, point. And again, even if you might not have budgets for primary research to go out there and talk to people, there's a lot of different ways, again, whether it's social listening, again, kind of the same thing, but I spent a lot of time on Reddit, just seeing what is the conversation, not just about what people are talking about your brand, but what are they talking about in terms of the category? And that's also a really good way to get some really valuable insights that are relevant and happening today.
The next question is, what types of research help financial brands and financial institutions understand what really drives that valuable attention and drives action and is not just awareness that goes nowhere?
Right. So I'll let Eva take this in a second, but a lot of that is, what are your challenges? What questions are you looking to answer? Like, that's how we approach it at first. Is it that you have a product that's not selling well, and you need to better understand, is it the product? Is it your brand awareness? Is it that people don't associate you with that product? That would be a very specific type of study, but that's a lot of the time it's, what do you think? What is your hypothesis? What do you think that your challenges are? And then we can build a research plan around that. But Eva can speak more eloquently about this.
No, that's actually how I always start. Like, what is your objective? Um, is part of your, I don't want to say the name. I've worked on a particular financial product that skewed older. So, is that challenge of my members are aging out, and how do I engage with younger members? Am I a new fintech that is really strong among young people, but struggles to get the kind of more established banking customer? Am I a really well-known brand that is regional and wants to branch out nationally? There's a lot of different directions. So you absolutely start with your objective. But again, just like we saw with healthcare, so much is changing in the financials because of all the digital tools. How can we kind of just better understand that landscape, and what are some of the trends? I think is another very important layer there.
Again, this comes down to what we were saying before too, like, don't just assume you understand what consumers are thinking. And I think for both healthcare and also for financial institutions, really understanding what the psychology is behind switching behavior. Why today are people switching? And again, I would want to understand further, from financial institutions, is it, are they all offer driven? Are the people that do move for the $500, are they less likely to have a higher lifetime value because they came in that way? And kind of reassessing who you want to bring into the fold, who's going to be your most valuable customers, by learning about what people's past behavior was and what brought them to where they are now. Maybe, understanding what the barriers are to switching accounts. What are different things that we can ask and understand about them to either make a better value proposition, or, understand, again, that's where that relevance comes in. What is the relevance to you? Why should you take the trouble to switch over? You need to do that learning to understand that psychology before you can develop that.
Yeah. And maybe also find not just people who are thinking of switching from your brand, but in that landscape, are there other unhappy customers of another brand that you can easily steal market share from? So, kind of that other flip side of, thinking about what you bring to the market, and maybe there's other prospects out there who are prime customers for you as well.
And really, and again, I think that comes down to really understanding the drivers. So there's, and again, this is something that Eva works with every day, right? Not just like taking, oh, so-and-so said that they switched because of XYZ, versus really doing the research to draw those correlations. Like we know in the healthcare space or the Medicare space, we use a research provider called DEF that does a huge research study every year. And we know that people that are more likely to switch Medicare plans are people that have had to contact customer service and not had first call resolution. So those are the types of like insights and nuggets that you want to start to understand what's motivating people to act.
A fast final question is going to be, how can brands know or measure which media channels are really earning them the right kind of attention versus just getting a view?
Yeah, I mean, there's things that we will look at, right? Like time spent, engagement with a particular ad, completion rates. Those just media metrics are super helpful in understanding that. We also, in addition to some of those attention metrics, we want to have brand lift studies in place that will also prove that value. And it allows us to really optimize for the quality, not just the quantity. So those are things that we'll look at from a media perspective.
That was fast. Thank you. So again, thank you so much, Eva, Alyssa, everyone that joined us. We really appreciate you tuning in. Please use the QR code. We love chatting about this stuff and would love to set up some, smaller group discussions if you do have any more questions. So thank you.